All right, kings, gentlemen, everyone else. A couple of videos ago, I announced the imminent collapse of the Russian Federation, and of course, this drew the usual coterie of disinfo agents, trolls, bots, and just sad human beings in need of a. Well, I don't really know what they need. If I did, I would be in the business of deprogramming cultists. As it happens, though, I have removed these disruptive elements from the chat. However, it did remind me that I did not really build the case for the collapse of the Russian Federation. I just assumed my audience would understand that this is a given. A metaphor I've used in the past is that as I've said before, Russia is a 68-year-old man who picked a fight and is now in the boxing ring going 12 rounds with a much younger man. This fat old fuck is gonna die of a heart attack. But let's try and understand Russian weakness. Here is why the Russian state is weak. So first, let's use some historical evidence to shore up this theory that the Russian state is weak. I'm going to advance a rather bold proposition here that Russia doesn't really win wars unless it has help from the West, and more often than not from specifically the Anglo world, Britain and America, or the United States, you could call them. So, for example, the Russians are very, very, very proud of their victory in the Great Patriotic War, which the rest of the world calls the Second World War. But the fact of the matter is that if it hadn't been for American Lend-Lease, the Germans would have steamrolled the Russians. They would have crushed them. They would have, passing by the stage, they would have seized Moscow, executed Stalin, yada, yada, yada. They would have rid the world of the Soviet menace. And furthermore, even with the massive Lend-Lease, Germany would have still destroyed the Soviet Union had it not been for the Allied bombing campaign against the German industrial centers, And over on Radical Dose, which is my webzine, we have published something about essentially how unimportant the Eastern Front was in the Second World War, how the real fight was always between Germany on one side and United Kingdom, France, and America on the other. Moving on to the Napoleonic Wars, the Russians are very proud of having quote-unquote defeated Napoleon. Fact of the matter is, Napoleon defeated himself in Russia. He overstepped his logistics, and he still managed to burn Moscow to the ground, win every battle except Borodino. Borodino was a draw, after which Napoleon withdrew. However, how did Russia manage to stall and delay Napoleon for so long? I mean, I'm not taken away from the, you could call it operational genius of General Kutuzov. The reason was simple, because the logistics for the Russian Empire was handled by the British. Without British logistics, they would have just fallen to the Grande Armée, they would have fallen to Napoleon, and well, we wouldn't be having the problems we have today. In fact, it's telling that in 1917, when the Ottoman Empire shut down the Straits of Bosphorus, right, well, the Turks shut the Straits of Bosphorus in 1915, and by 1917, Russia was defeated by Germany, which was also fighting the French and the British on the other side of the continent, on the Western Front. Russia is simply a weak state which cannot win if it doesn't have someone else fight its battles for it, or run its logistics for it. In fact, I racked my knowledge of history for any example of a war which Russia has won against a peer enemy without Western assistance. And the only example I could think of was the Great Northern War, where Peter I managed to defeat the Swedes, kick them out of Estonia, and bring Russia to the Baltic Sea. And Peter I, his army was lousy with Western mercenaries commanded by English and Germans and French. To call it a Russian army would be, well, a cat can have kittens in an oven. That doesn't make them cookies, as the old saying goes. So, Russia has always had assistance, and it has always been useful, mostly to the Anglophone powers, and this is how it has managed to sort of scrounge by and pretend to be a great power when it is in fact a profoundly weak state. When it doesn't have assistance from these allies, such like for example in Afghanistan, or during both Chechen wars, or right now in Ukraine, it is exposed as a laughably incompetent state. Now, why is this the case? Well, the reason is simple. Russia is weak because it is authoritarian, and authoritarian states can never mobilize their full potential. Why fight for an authoritarian state? Really, I mean, you got to ask yourself a question. Unless they're giving you money, and no amount of money is worth your life, not really, what reason do you have to fight for this state? You have to have a sort of political formula which deals you in, which gives you a reason why the affairs of the state are your state. Well, authoritarian states are, by definition, private states, right? They are the property of the Tsar, or the president, or the oligarchy. Maybe it's a joint stock corporation type state, not one guy owning it, but multiple people owning it. Oligarchies are these types of states, and the affairs of the states are private affairs of the emperor. They're private affairs of the oligarchs. They don't concern you. You are property of the state. I mean, what the fuck do I care? It's like being an employee at some company, boss makes $1, I make a dime. That's why I shit on company time, obviously. So in order to motivate the citizenry to fight for the state in war and sacrifice in peace, to give them the sort of civilizational oomph that leads to invention, to innovation, to discovery, to creation, all the beautiful things we call civilization, you have to deal the public in. You have to make affairs of the state a public matter, or if you'll permit me to use the Queen's Latin, a res publica. Res publica, of course, that's Latin for public matters, right? The matters, the affairs of the state are public affairs. They belong to all of us, and so the state can then very credibly take me from my civilian life, put me in uniform, put a gun in my hand, point at enemies of the state, which it has designated so, and say, go over there, kill those cocksuckers. And I have an obligation to do it because affairs of the state are my affairs as a citizen, not a subject, a citizen. And that is the great power of, you could call it a liberal state, you could call it a republic, you could even call it a liberal democratic republic. I know that's going to rifle some feathers, but in essentially making affairs of the state public affairs, you deal the population in. And of course, this gives you a boost not only in war, but also in peace. But in war, it gives you access to a little something we like to call levée en masse, which was a truly astounding revolution in military affairs from the Napoleonic period and the French Revolution period, and everyone in Europe had to adopt it because the French state just brought so much more of its potential to bear in war and in peace that all of its competitors had to evolve or die. And they evolved, and this is why Europe, even the monarchies of Europe, are liberal states, and the affairs of the state are public matters today. And contrast that to authoritarian states. There's never been an authoritarian state which has been strong, right? And people often talk about the Third Reich as if it's an authoritarian state, but to say that the affairs of the Reich were private affairs of Hitler, just beggars belief. No, that was a very public state. It was possibly the most public type of state you could imagine, and that's why we call it a totalitarian regime. There's a big difference between authoritarian and totalitarian. We can get into it some other time. And there's your reason. There's your reason. Actually, it turns out that authoritarianism, trad-chuttery, whatever, they're not based in red pill. They're a recipe for weakness. and authoritarian regimes just get swept away by, you can call them liberal republics. And the surest way to deal the public in, is to make the res publica, the affairs of the state, not only public, but also it helps if they're true and if they're romantic. And we're going to be talking about that some other time, because I guess we're out of time and I'm back to the busy streets. Bye-bye, people, and take care.